When a man who has spent his entire career telling the truth about the hardest parts of his life finally breaks his silence about the end of his marriage, the words land differently than they would coming from almost anyone else. Jelly Roll has built everything he has on a single premise: that honesty about pain is more valuable than pretending it away. He has talked about jail cells and addiction and the years he spent trying to become someone who deserved the life he now has. He has done it in songs, in interviews, on stages in front of tens of thousands of people who recognized something of themselves in what he was describing. So when the news broke in June 2026 that he had filed for divorce from Bunnie Xo, his wife of 10 years, the public reaction was not simply celebrity gossip. It was the response of an audience that had been invited deeply into this marriage and did not fully understand how to process its ending. What Jelly Roll has said since then, and what Bunnie has said, and what the documented record of their decade together actually shows, tells a story that is more complicated and more human than either the romantic version or the tragedy version that were immediately assembled by the internet. Jelly Roll, born Jason DeFord, filed for divorce from Bunnie Xo, born Elisa DeFord, on May 18, 2026, according to court records from Williamson County, Tennessee, with the couple having separated on May 9 and Jelly Roll citing irreconcilable differences as the reason for the filing. They had been married since August 2016. The filing came roughly 2 months before what would have been their 10th wedding anniversary. The timing meant that the marriage ended just short of the decade milestone, and the gap between the life they had been building publicly in the months before the separation and the court records that ended it was wide enough to genuinely surprise people who had been watching. The beginning of their story belongs to Las Vegas, and to a version of both of them that was considerably different from what they eventually became. Bunnie recalled on the Bus Sin with the Boys podcast in 2023 that she had met Jelly Roll in August 2015 when he performed at the Las Vegas Country Saloon before he was famous, that at the time he was living out of a van and estimated about 20 people attended his show, and that when she met him her soul told her there he was even though he was not her type and she was not his. She was in an unhealthy relationship at the time and they did not immediately get together, but they reconnected in October 2015 and she described herself as simply smitten. He was building a music following through years of underground rap recordings made in borrowed spaces, carrying a criminal record and a personal history that most industries use as a reason to close doors. She had built a life in Las Vegas and was coming out of a domestic violence relationship of her own. Neither of them was operating from a place of stability when they found each other. They married quietly in Las Vegas in August 2016, with none of the ceremony that celebrity marriages typically involve. 2 years later the marriage nearly ended. Jelly Roll said on the October 2025 premiere episode of the Human School podcast that one of the worst moments of his adulthood was when he had an affair on his wife, that it was the first time he truly understood he could not get anything right even when he knew he was in love, and that it really, really blew him back. He had never said this publicly before that podcast appearance. He went on to say that he had done a lot of work to repair the relationship, that the repair had been special, and that he was proud of who they had become together even though he wished the affair had never happened. That admission, offered 7 months before the divorce filing, was received as a statement about how far they had come rather than a foreshadowing of what was coming. In 2024, Bunnie revealed on TikTok that they had broken up in 2018, that she had moved back to Las Vegas, and that he had come to bring her back, writing that who knew that them breaking up in 2018, her moving to Vegas, and him coming to get her back would have put them on the wild journey called life, and that they had finally committed to each other and done everything they had promised each other the first night in 2016. The 2018 separation and reconciliation became one of the central chapters in how both of them talked about their relationship publicly. They described the work they did during that period as the thing that made everything afterward more durable, the foundation that had been built not from ease but from the decision to stay after a reason to leave had already existed. By 2023, the public dimension of their marriage had expanded dramatically. Jelly Roll was no longer underground. He was on country radio, at stadium venues, winning awards, and walking red carpets. The songs about addiction and incarceration and survival that had connected with underground rap audiences connected just as powerfully with country music listeners who found the same honesty in a different sonic framework. He and Bunnie renewed their vows in 2023, returning to Las Vegas, the city where the marriage had started, and the vow renewal carried the weight of everything they had survived together since the first ceremony. Bunnie's Dumb Blonde podcast had developed a significant following of its own, building her into a recognizable public figure in her own right rather than simply the wife of an increasingly famous musician. In June 2024, they went public with something they had planned to keep private. Bunnie posted on Instagram that she and Jelly Roll had met with IVF doctors and were exploring all options, describing them as excited and scared simultaneously and saying they had genuinely never thought they would want to add to their family but that something had changed and they both wanted a piece of themselves together to add to the family they had already built with his children Bailey and Noah. The IVF journey became one of the most followed threads in their public life, and it was also one of the most painful. Bunnie later said the couple had tried multiple times to have a child together and had lost 4 embryos, describing the process as hellacious and saying the experience had wrecked her emotionally, spiritually, and physically, and that both she and Jelly Roll had undergone hormone treatments as part of the fertility journey, with Bunnie describing herself as becoming a shell during treatment while saying Jelly Roll was difficult to be around once they began the hormone treatments. In her memoir Stripped Down, Unfiltered and Unapologetic, published in February 2026, Bunnie wrote that the couple had found a surrogate and hoped to have twins, expressing that she had waited that long to have children with someone she knew would be a great father in order to ensure they would have the best life. The memoir appeared 4 months before the divorce filing. At the time of its publication, the picture of the marriage it presented was one of 2 people who had worked through genuine difficulty and arrived at a place of genuine commitment. The IVF losses, the hormone treatments, the search for a surrogate, these were not the details of a relationship that was coasting. They were the details of a relationship making active and costly investment in its own future. The separation happened on May 9, 2026. The divorce was filed 9 days later. Jelly Roll addressed the split publicly at a concert in Saratoga Springs, New York, telling the audience that while he was not going to talk about the situation that night, and that it was the only time and the only city he would speak about it, he wanted people to know that he and Bunnie were best friends, that they would always be best friends, that they had just gotten off the phone earlier that day, and that nobody cheated on nobody, telling the audience directly that she had done a whole podcast about it and that every word of it was the truth. That statement from the stage addressed directly the rumors that had been circulating online connecting the 2025 Human School podcast admission about the 2018 affair to the current divorce, and Jelly Roll's clarity on that point was unmistakable. The end of the marriage was not connected to infidelity. The affair had happened, had been acknowledged, had been survived, and was not what ended this. Bunnie addressed the divorce on the June 18 episode of her Dumb Blonde podcast, telling listeners that she and Jelly Roll were ending the marriage on the best possible terms, that they had settled the divorce in 2 to 3 weeks, and that Jelly Roll had agreed to give her the property they had purchased together, a compound with 3 houses that she had been largely designing herself, because he knew how special it was to her. She described her ex-husband as generous in how the settlement was handled and characterized the ending not as a rupture but as a transition. She also revealed on the Dumb Blonde podcast that she and Jelly Roll still plan to raise a child together through surrogacy despite the divorce, telling listeners they had committed to the journey and were continuing it. That detail, that 2 people who have just ended their marriage are still planning to parent a child together, speaks to the specific nature of what this relationship is and what it is becoming, something that does not fit neatly into the conventional narrative of a celebrity divorce. Jelly Roll's daughter Bailey, 18, addressed the divorce on her TikTok story on June 16, writing that she was disgusted at how invested everyone was in what was clearly a very private family matter. That response from a young woman who had been inside this family for its entire public decade carried a clarity about the gap between what the public thought it owned of this story and what the family actually owned of it. Jelly Roll and Bunnie had been transparent people across their entire public life together, but transparency about your own story is different from consenting to have that story consumed as entertainment by strangers with strong opinions about choices that do not involve them. What Jelly Roll has said in the aftermath of the filing is consistent with the person he has been across the entire arc of his public life. He thanked Bunnie from a concert stage for 10 years of marriage and expressed gratitude for the next 10 years of friendship. He clarified that the internet was lying about infidelity and directed people to his ex-wife's podcast for the actual truth. He continued performing, continued talking honestly, and did not retreat from the visibility that has defined his career even as the most personal part of his private life was dissolving. He posted a YouTube video titled The Divorce Vlog, in which he took fans behind the scenes of his CMA Fest performance and life on the road with his and Post Malone's stadium tour, with Bunnie joining the video by phone and both of them pointing curious fans toward her podcast for the full account of their separation. The story of Jelly Roll and Bunnie Xo across 10 years is a story about two people who found each other in damaged circumstances, built something that survived things that would have finished most relationships, became genuinely different people in the process, and then reached a point where the people they had become were pointing in directions the marriage could no longer accommodate. The 2018 affair was survived. The separation was survived. The IVF losses were survived. The transition from underground musician to Grammy-nominated country star was survived. What could not ultimately be survived, according to the only people who actually know, is whatever private combination of changes and distances accumulated in those final months before May 9th. The divorce is filed. The friendship is stated publicly as ongoing. The surrogacy journey is stated publicly as continuing. The story is not over. It has simply changed its shape, the way that Jelly Roll's entire life has repeatedly changed its shape, into something that neither the people inside it nor the people watching it from outside could fully have predicted.